Blessed by Shaya and Basnett. A Brief History of Mabel-Tacknell, aka Prologue. On a world not completely unlike ours, there was magic. This world had many different continents, each with their own belief systems and cultures, as lands are meant to do. On this planet, there was one big difference between our world and it. It still contained magic. It was raw and vital, and it was created by gods and goddesses. This world was called Mabel-Tacknell. On this world was a large continent that was split into 3 landmasses, Aetrila. It was a great and vast landmass made of many different types of landscapes, many different types of people, each with their own ideals and ideologies. Really, it was no different from any of the other worlds that existed in the many universes. There was a north and south Aetrila, and an outlying kingdom to the west, called the Isles. No one knew what was to the west of Aetrila, past the Isles, but rumors said the end of their world and the beginning of the gods' realm was to the west. To the east lay many other lands, each to be explored in their own time. What truly made this world more special than the world we might be used to was the magic and the gods. This magic was not hidden away or very subtle. It was strong in the environment and within certain people, and in the gods each was powerful in their own way, as all gods could be, but these ones were highly involved in the mortals' lives, especially in the coming days, for a god was only as strong as their mortal triumph, and they needed those triumphs to be strong. Some mortals who were chosen by the gods to be their champions were called the gods blessed, though why you would call them that is really an odd thing. They were immortal, unless released by the god or killed by another blessed. Even gods and goddesses couldn't slay blessed. The creators of their world, the mother of all beings, and the father of the universe had long forbidden their children to kill mortals, as well as each other. Most blessed were born into the world, but some were chosen as young children. To birth such a child would usually kill the mother, for the power of the divine is a hard thing for a mortal body to contain. As it was, there had not been such a creation in over a millennium, as there was no need. There was peace, and no need for a god or goddess to create such a weapon. For well blessed could be the salvation of a god or goddess. They could also be their undoing. It was a gamble to create, so no one did it lightly. For a blessed had all the powers of mortals and divine, and none of the rules. Hundreds of years before the current age of Mabel-Tacknell, where our story begins, there was the Great War. This war completely restructured the lands of North and South Aetrila. Aetrila was claimed to be the mortal home of the gods and goddesses before they went to the divine realms. It was where the magic was strongest. The war was fought between the children of the original creators. After the birth of their children, they retired to their own peace. The father went silent and self-isolated. The mother of all beings fled out of the divine realms to search for happiness in the world she created. Many gods and goddesses oversaw the many different functions within this world. There was the god of cunning, the mother who needed no other name as she was the goddess of motherhood, fertility, and vengeance. There was the god of death, the virgin goddess, the sea god, and so on. Then there was the birth of the youngest god. Jealous of the other's powers, he hatched a plan to become the king of the gods and kill off his family. To begin, he began to preach his own religion to his followers. To make you understand how foreign his religion was to those of Aetrila, one first had to understand the people. Men and women were of equal rights. Women were warriors, and men could be caregivers. Men could love men, and women could love women. In this world all was possible, and one only needed to be fueled by their own ambition to succeed. Royalty, not in line to their thrones, could marry local nobility, or higher peasant class. Queens could lead by themselves, and have their own illegitimate children lead their countries. It was a world in which chaos reigned supreme. People believed their own opinions, but in the chaos came the harmony, for all were respected for their opinions and choices. Neighbors could listen to neighbors and debate, but there was no cost for not agreeing. It was beautiful, as chaos could only be, beautiful in the wildness that it inspired. The one God didn't like this. He didn't like his fellow gods getting worshipped. He hated chaos and preferred structure. So he began to slowly change his followers. Only men could be his priests, and women who followed the teachings were not allowed to be warriors. They had to be mothers and care for their children. Men went to work and ruled the household with an iron fist. Over many centuries, women began to give up their rights, and the men as well, for they were told to work and not to think. The followers became his sheep, and then his flock. No one argued. All blindly followed his teachings. And in this simplicity, chaos died. I know what you're thinking. To go from complete freedom to complete control. It's madness. Who would agree to it? No woman would go from making her own choices to willingly following another's orders without thought. However, freedom comes with its own headaches, and this god was a devious one indeed. It began slowly over many generations, a puzzle piece by a puzzle piece. And because it was so slow, even the gods and goddesses didn't pay heed. Slowly he gained more followers, and that was how the divine get their powers. And finally, when he was ready, he shed his old name and donned the simple name he knew would make his plans clear to his brothers and sisters. He became the one god. Only a single god had watched this puzzle slowly begin to formulate, and he figured it out a half a century before the others. This, of course, was the very god of cunning. Although he cursed himself for being slow to the game, he sped to catch up. And so they began their chess match of sorts. Slowly, the one god followers began to try to silence their neighbors and scorn their women warriors. Queens were browbeat down to a humble position below the kings. Wars began to scatter the mortal lands. And then the one god did something no one had done for centuries. He made a human his blessed. To make a blessed takes a lot of power from a god. It can kill a weaker human, and gods can be weak for upwards of a century. The one god chose a simple human male, a soldier, a man baited from a simple life, turned to the darkness and strict life. When the human went back to the woman in his life and proposed that they abandon their faiths and follow the teachings of the one god, well, they did not react very well. The blessed man barely escaped with his body intact from their rage and fled to his god's side and began to direct his armies. The one god in his many millenniums of living hadn't learned one thing: be wary of a woman scorned. It became his original downfall, for when the man abandoned his family and began the Great War, kingdoms tumbled, and the previously chaos harmony was jeopardized. The one god began to prematurely celebrate his potential victory. However, the cunning one had yet to utilize an important part of his plan. The war had jeopardized the safety of the forgotten family, and when the cunning appeared to the woman at the head of his family in their war-riddled country, he had an offer she couldn't refuse. Protection for the family in any war to come in exchange for her eternal servitude. Like any good family member, she agreed. And so when the cunning one put all his power into a woman pained by abandonment, and she hunted out, with Old Blessed, ones who had laid dormant for centuries, with her cunning, the battle savvy that came from her bond to the cunning one, and slowly she beat down the success of the one god. Battle by battle, the kingdoms were recovered, and the darkness was being beat down. It wasn't quite enough, though, as the one god gave his blessed a divine weapon to turn the tides once again. It was going to be the ends of days. To be safe, she hunted out the forgotten goddess, who possessed her own divine weapon that could kill and banish gods and goddesses. And she bargained with this old goddess who was forgotten in her exile, an exile no mortal remembered why she had been sentenced to. And for some reason, this goddess gave the blessed her gift, her power, the god killer, along with a dark omen. A final battle was had on the very southwest corner of the northern continent, a battle between the gods and their blessed. It was so brutal that it cleared the land of all the animals, people, and foliage on it, and it ended with the members of that family face to face, each with their own divine weapon. With brutal precision, the woman used all her powers from the cunning one, and the powers she had gotten from the forgotten goddess to smite her family members and weaken the one god. And with all her bitterness, she cast the one god to the furthest reaches of their galaxy, in exile. She sealed him to the dark planet, though as she did, he screamed he would return. Then the war was over. But life didn't go to how it was. She never returned to her family. She was too changed in her struggle with divinity. Instead, she used her powers to heal the land they had battled on and built a large manor house, where she settled as the lady of the manor, facing to the sea and always watching the far dark planet. Slowly, a village was built outside her walls, and although her lands had been part of two kingdoms, they never tried to take her land from her. Legends were started about her as she settled into her recluse. In the aftermath of the war, the old ways never fully returned. Although the one god's followers were quiet and worshipped in private, the worship of the old gods and goddesses was tainted. Women never ruled again without a man, other than the one kingdom of the Heartlands. Women warriors became a thing of the past for most kingdoms, and no more blessed were made. Depending on where you lived in Etrila, decided what kind of god or goddess you would worship, and whether or not magic was acceptable in society. Depending on who the ruler of a kingdom was, decided if their people were allowed to use magic. Some places merely frowned upon the use of magic. Some full accepted and encouraged their supernaturally inclined, and others, more rural, superstitious kingdoms, their magically inclined hide and if found were horribly tortured and killed. It became the blank age, where the gods and goddesses were silent. Some believed they were dead for they weren't heard of for centuries. The blessed left alive went into exile, and the divine were silent. Magic wielders became fewer and fewer in between, and people lost their way. One day the lady of the manor woke one day from a prophetic dream. In her dream the one god was returned. The world was burning, and she was warned. The power of 7 could stop this. But without those 7, life would be lost. So she began to prepare for the others and wait for them to appear. Her village became busy again, and slowly she began to prepare for his second coming, and the death it would bring. And that is where our story begins.